On January 15, 1919, a wall of molasses 25 feet high tore through the streets of Boston at 35 miles per hour. It crushed buildings, drowned horses, and killed 21 people. And the company that caused it almost got away with blaming someone else. This is the true story of the Great Boston Molasses Flood, the strangest disaster in American history. By the end of this video, you will know how a leaky tank of syrup changed American law forever, and why every company you buy from today still lives with the consequences. But to understand how 2.3 million gallons of molasses became a weapon, you have to start with the tank everyone in the neighborhood knew was broken. In 1915, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company threw up a steel tank in Boston's crowded North End, right on Commercial Street, between the harbor and an elevated train line. The tank was enormous, 50 feet tall and 90 feet across, built to hold 2.3 million gallons of molasses. That molasses was money. Fermented and distilled, it became industrial alcohol for making munitions and rum. The company wanted it built fast, and it showed. The tank was completed in a hurry in December of 1915, and according to locals, it leaked from the very first day. Children in the neighborhood would sneak up to it with buckets and cans, collecting the sweet syrup dripping down its sides. Residents said the steel groaned and shuddered whenever the tank was filled. The company had an answer for the ugliness, though. They painted the whole thing brown, the color of molasses, so nobody could see the rust streaks or the leaks. And the tank was never properly tested. Instead of being filled with water to check its strength, the standard practice for a tank like this, it was simply filled with molasses and put to work. But the tank was not the only thing under pressure. January of 1919 began brutally cold. Then, in the middle of the month, the weather turned. On January 14th, a ship pumped a fresh load of warm molasses from the Caribbean into the tank, straight into the old, cold syrup inside. The next day, January 15th, was unusually mild for winter, around 40 degrees. Warmer molasses meant more fermentation, and more fermentation meant carbon dioxide gas building pressure inside a tank that was never built to hold it. At about noon, when the streets of the North End were full of workers on their lunch break, the tank let go. Witnesses described a sound like machine gun fire as the rivets snapped, one after another, from the bottom of the tank upward. The steel plates tore open, and 2.3 million gallons of molasses came out all at once. The wave was 25 feet high and moving at 35 miles per hour, fast enough that nobody on the street could outrun it. It smashed the Engine 31 firehouse flat. It crumpled the steel supports of the elevated train line. It picked up a truck and threw it into the harbor. Horses drowned where they stood, trapped in their harnesses. People were swept into the sticky tide, and the cruel physics of molasses did the rest. The colder it got, the thicker it became, like quicksand made of syrup. Rescue workers waded in up to their waists, searching for survivors in the brown tide. When it was over, 21 people were dead, and about 150 were injured. Some bodies were so coated in molasses they were hard to identify. It was one of the deadliest industrial disasters in Boston's history. But what happened next in a Boston courtroom was almost as unbelievable as the flood itself. The company had a story ready. United States Industrial Alcohol announced that the tank had been bombed by Italian anarchists. And in 1919, that was not a crazy thing to claim. Anarchists really had been setting off bombs across America. The company even pointed to the twisted steel as proof of an explosion from outside. The families of the dead said otherwise, and they sued. More than 100 claims were rolled into one enormous case, and the court appointed an auditor named Hugh Ogden to hear it all. The hearings went on for years. Engineers testified about steel thickness and rivet strength, and the evidence was damning. The tank's walls were too thin for a tank of that size. The rivets had snapped from the inside out, from the bottom up, exactly the failure you would expect from pressure, not from a bomb. And there was the matter of the test that never happened. The company had never filled the tank with water to prove it could hold the weight. And the twist that destroyed the company's defense did not come from an expert at all. It came from the neighbors. Ordinary people from the North End testified that the tank had leaked for years, that they had collected molasses from its weeping seams, that it groaned when it was full. The company's own brown paint turned into evidence that they knew. After nearly 6 years of hearings, United States Industrial Alcohol gave up the bomb story and agreed to pay. The settlement was about $628,000, roughly $11 million in today's money, shared among the victims and their families. That might sound modest, but the case changed everything. It was one of the first major lawsuits in Massachusetts history where ordinary citizens banded together to take on a corporation and won. Lawyers today point to the Molasses case as a milestone on the road to the modern class action lawsuit, and the idea that a company is responsible for the dangers it creates, whether or not it meant to cause harm, became part of how America expects business to behave. Every safety inspection, every engineering standard, every corporate liability case since lives in the shadow of that tank. So the next time someone tells you history is boring, remember Boston, a city once destroyed by desert. A leaky tank nobody fixed became a wave nobody could outrun. In a courtroom fight nobody expected the victims to win. Locals claimed that on hot summer days, for decades afterward, the streets of the North End still smelled of molasses. If you want more true stories like this one, subscribe to What the Facts. Next up, the year there was no summer at all. You will not believe what caused it.